Okay. All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Connie Kohlmeyer. I'm an educator with the Conservation Foundation. We would like to thank Itasca Bank and Trust and Bedrock Earthscapes LLC for sponsoring this webinar this evening. Sponsors like these help us to keep these webinars free for everyone. Please contact us for more information on sponsoring if you are interested. We greatly appreciate our sponsors. I will post our contact information and the links for our sponsors' websites in the chat and on YouTube with the recording when that gets posted. You, the viewer, can also help us to keep these webinars free. If you enjoy these webinars, we encourage you to please donate to help TCF continue to do all the wonderful things we do, including and in addition to our webinars. When you become a member, you'll also enjoy our wide variety of members only offerings. And with 2022 being the 50th anniversary of the Conservation Foundation, we have some really fun things in the works. We've got some really fun events and activities happening this year. So follow us on social media as well to learn more and to stay updated on events and happenings. And in terms of our upcoming immediate events and happenings, we have our next webinar scheduled for next month is going to be on July 6th, Wednesday evening, as usual, at 7 p.m. Our topic is tips for exploring nature with kids. So we're going to be joining some of the Conservation Foundation's experienced youth educators as they showcase some simple ways to engage kids with nature and have fun outside exploring the natural world around us, just in time so that we're prepared for those midsummer "I'm bored" comments. So we've got you covered. We'll have some tips and some fun activities for you to do with kids at home to help keep them engaged with nature over the summer. And speaking of the kids, we do still have a few spots open for this summer's Nature on the Farm summer camps. And we also have family adventures coming up. So we can't let the kids have all the fun. Family adventures, the whole family gets to come out and have fun at the farm. Our second annual trivia night, hosted by the Next Gen Advisory Council at the Conservation Foundation, or of the Conservation Foundation, I should say, is on Tuesday, June 14th at Two Brothers Roundhouse in Aurora. And information on these events is posted on the website, which I will also post in the chat. And it's also June, it's getting to be farm stand season. So since our special guest this evening is our Green Earth Harvest Farm Manager, Jason Halm, I'll let him give you a little more information on that and the upcoming farm events for the summer. And so with that, actually, I'm going to go ahead and introduce him. We're really lucky to have Jason joining us tonight because it's a very busy season. He's busy growing all kinds of good food for us. So we're lucky to get a little bit of his time this evening, and we appreciate you being here, Jason. He's going to speak with us about local foods and give us a whole lot of really good information on this topic. So I'm excited about this. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Jason. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me tonight. I'm super excited to talk about local food in general, a little bit specifically about what we do at Green Earth Harvest, which is the organic farm program of the Conservation Foundation. The Conservation Foundation is in its 50th year, and at Green Earth, we are in our 20th year of growing. So it's kind of a double anniversary, which is very exciting. And we're hoping to make this the best growing season yet. The weeds have other ideas, but we have the best idea of them all. And I will start sharing my screen actually. And let's share that for now.
Hey, Jason. You know, You are muted, and on my end, I'm not able to unmute you. Somehow it's not letting me unmute. It says that you need to do it, probably because I've got you as a co-host rather than a regular panelist. Just need to click the unmute.
There we go. Was I muted that whole time?
You were not. It just muted basically when you started the slides.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
All right, thank you.
Good. Thank you for letting me know. There we go. So I'm going to talk to you about Green Earth Harvest, some specifics about what we do here at our farm in Naperville, our 60-acre organic vegetable farm. And then a little bit about how local food came to be a local food movement. What are the benefits, some of the drawbacks or the supposed drawbacks? And I hear sometimes local foods as a kind of solution to everything, every problem that's out there. So what are they good for? Absolutely everything. Maybe not absolutely everything, but obviously I'm a local vegetable grower, local organic vegetable grower, and there's not much that I'm a more forceful advocate for. So thanks for having me. And just a little bit of an introduction to Green Earth Harvest. We feed 700 families every year through our farm share or CSA, through our farm stands on Wednesday evenings from 3 to 6, and on Saturday mornings from 9 to noon. We expect those to start in early July, probably right after the 4th of July. Maybe a touch before that, but definitely right around the 4th of July. So come on down to 10S404 Knock Knolls Road. We have a canopy set up right at the end of the driveway, right on Knock Knolls Road, and we're selling produce all organically certified, all grown right here in Naperville. We are working towards my big goal right now is to produce local food for 52 weeks out of the year, and local vegetables in particular for 52 weeks out of the year. We figure we can give ourselves a half week off for the new year and the holidays, but we want the question, we want the question for people to not be, oh, wow, you got vegetables from a local farm. Like, that's so cool. That's so unique. We want the question to be, which local farm did you get vegetables from in the dead of an Illinois winter? So I'll talk a little bit more about that, and also about how at your home you can grow, if you want, through at least kind of the middle or late fall. There we go. And a nice little screenshot from when I was putting this, from when I was finishing up this slideshow. I just wanted to show you where we were. Like I mentioned, we're right in the middle of Naperville. I tried to start counting the houses just in this picture, and I got to 100 and had started on the left side and hadn't even gotten to the farm yet. So you can see we're just surrounded by a community of eaters. And I think a big part of local food, or the local food movement, is the idea that eaters and farms don't have to be separate from one another, and that farms are best located in areas where there are people, generally speaking. And I definitely agree with that. On our farm, to feed those 700 families, we have in any given year 7 field crew members and a few other support staff. We use a couple big tractors. It's definitely tractor scale, but we do a lot of hand weeding, use a lot of kind of mid-size cultivation tools, if that makes sense. And I figured I would start, Yeah, I figured I would start by defining local food. It's a noun. What is a local food? or yeah, what is a local food and what is a local farm, or what are local farms? Um, and I think we can measure this by different measures of geography. I've heard if you go to Whole Foods or to Jewel Osco, of course, like local means pretty much anything, um, depending on the store. I'm sure that each company has their own definition, but I've heard anything from 50 miles, 100 miles, 400 miles, 600 miles within the same state. Um, or is it something else? You know, to me, I consider uh, local food, or I consider food that's grown in Southwest Wisconsin or Southeast Minnesota or in Michigan, to some extent is local. It's, to me, it's more of an aspect of how connected am I to this place, which is obviously subjective and does not work the same for each person. I think a good question to ask is, how is this product distributed? Most people, when they say local food, mean local food that's sold direct to consumer. And how is it grown? A lot of people think of organic food when they think of local food, but that's not necessarily always the case, or that's even often not the case. Some growers use organic practices, but aren't certified. Some are certified. Some don't use organic practices at all. Some do something kind of in the middle, like certified naturally grown. So I think it's better to think, when we talk about what is local food and what are local farms, to think in a spectrum of colors rather than a binary, this is local, this is non-local. You know, the tomato grown in my backyard and grapes grown in South America are kind of the two extremes, but in between there's the actual lived reality of most food that we eat. And I, you know, kind of think this is interesting. Um, I personally think that the local food movement, to the extent that it is a unified-ish movement, um, really came out of a backlash to the sameness of some of the foods of the 80s and 90s, and even before that. Growing up, my dad's favorite salad was the wedge salad, which this picture in the bottom right is for sure far more aesthetically pleasing than most wedge salads I have seen. And interestingly enough, iceberg lettuce is supposedly on the comeback. One of my earliest food memories growing up in the early 90s was telling my mom I really wanted to try canned spinach, you know, just like Popeye. And I remember trying it and it being just absolutely disgusting. For a lot of us who grew up in the 80s, the 90s, the 70s, the 60s, and before that, like, this is what vegetables were to us: boiled Brussels sprouts, wedge salads, frozen peas and carrots, canned spinach. And I think in the early 90s and, you know, all the way through the present, the local food movement kind of rests on a central hypothesis that what is sensually pleasing or aesthetically pleasing, or what is delicious, is also morally and ecologically desirable. Um, and that's, I'm going to come back to that in a little bit in a different setting. And the growth over time, it's interesting. It does largely coincide with growth in the organic food movement. Local and organic they're not quite the same thing, but they are, both have gained in popularity so much over the past 20 or 30, I guess 30 years, really, in the United States. And so to really capture this, I brought in these graphs of just the counts of US farmers markets from 1994 to 2014 in the top one, and then it goes all the way through what was projected in 2019 in the bottom one. And you can see that it grows from under 2,000 in 1994 to, by the time the second graph picks up, it's more than doubled going into 2008. And then it grows even further, and heading into 2017, 2018, 2019, it kind of plateaus at the end, which is interesting. That farmers markets seem to have kind of hit a carrying capacity right around that time. I know that some have closed since 2020, but I don't think there's been a huge contraction. I think that number, if I had to guess, has remained pretty stable. And in some ways, the local food movement can really be described as a popularization of local food in urban and suburban centers of population. I think it's worth mentioning that to rural, to at least certain segments of the rural population, especially the rural poor, all food has always been local because you just couldn't really afford much else necessarily. And so I think that's just worth holding on to. And I don't mean this in a bad way necessarily at all, or really in a bad way at all. But it's almost like the gentrification of local food. It's like it finding widespread mainstream acceptance as something that should be aspired to. And local food has a ton of benefits. And I think it's really interesting the way some of these benefits are talked about. And this is where some of my contrarian takes on local food come out. But the benefits supposedly are really threefold, or fall into three main categories. Their health benefits, their environmental benefits, and then there's kind of an economic and social aspect of it. So I'll go through them kind of one by one. The health benefits, really interesting. In the 90s, like I mentioned, I grew up in the 90s, and weight of the American population had grown to become, by the end of the 1990s, really a major, people talked about the crisis of obesity and and these lifestyle diseases that were and still are doing a lot of harm to people. And right around that same time, you see local food really gaining in popularity, and you see organic food really gaining in popularity. And I think the reasons for that are kind of twofold. I think you see an increased prevalence of these lifestyle diseases, or what we call lifestyle diseases. I'm referring to cancer, like really high rates of cancer and of diabetes and of high blood pressure and so on and so forth, and cardiovascular issues. And so I think there was a backlash against that, like people genuinely wanted to improve their health. And I also think that I also think that local food kind of became something that individuals could do, or that we all thought that we could do. If there's anything that like Americans love, it's individualized solutions to societal issues. And so it's always interesting to me to see how health and weight and lifestyle diseases are talked about when it comes to local food. One thing that I want to come back to is kind of what role does stress play in health issues, and what role does pleasure play in health issues? And is, like I said, the central thesis of the local food movement, that that what is aesthetically or sensually pleasing, or what is tasty, also good for you and good for the planet and good good morally and good socially. And I actually think that that is the case. I think that humans, by and large, find our taste receptors are really attuned to what healthy food is. Once we kind of get our diet regulated a little bit and get attuned to what eating fresh food tastes like. There's nothing as tasty as a homegrown tomato, not even a farm-grown tomato, even though ours are very good, I'll have you know. And there's nothing as good as a fresh carrot in November after it's frozen or after it's frosted a few times, or spinach after it has frozen a few times through the early fall. And so, yeah, just that health side is huge. And another part of that I was talking to Connie about was that it is demonstrably true that as soon as you pick a vegetable or any food, the nutrient density of it begins to decline as time goes on. And I am not a nutritionist by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a big picture thinker, not a small details kind of guy, but that is absolutely true. That nutrient degradation does occur as soon as you harvest, and in the time that it takes for it to get to your plate. And so, for instance, at Green Earth Harvest, it is incredibly uncommon that we would sell a vegetable that we had picked more than 5 days ago. And even that is not the norm, but that's kind of where we top out at, except for storage vegetables, especially in the winter. On the environmental side, there's a lot of talk of climate change and greenhouse gases, and I just have to say this, that local farming and local foods will not fix climate change on their own. I could not tell you exactly how big of an effect local farms have on climate change. But I think that greenhouse gases and climate change is just I think it's the number one environmental issue facing the planet today. But that is really just one side of the environmental impact of conventional food systems, or conventional in the way they've come to be known over the past 60 or 70 years. The pesticide, fertilizer heavy farming, where we get everything imported from California. And so, one huge thing is water and land use. If I am getting lettuce that's grown in California or Arizona, as almost all of it is grown, if I go to Mariano's or to Jewel or probably to Whole Foods, like the vast majority of lettuce there is grown in California and Arizona in the winter. And there's not a lot of extra water in California and Arizona, but there is a lot of extra water at times in Illinois. And it doesn't really make sense to me to ship water over from the Colorado River to California in order to grow lettuce, which is highly nutritious, but mostly water, and then fly it or truck it all the way across the Continental Divide, when we can grow lettuce fairly easily here for well over half of the year. Probably, we could probably grow lettuce here for 35, 40 weeks out of the year, would be my guess, without too much trouble. And another topic on water and land use is that probably most people here know a little bit about this at least, but impermeable surfaces such as concrete, sidewalks, rooftops, water hits those when it rains, as it did last night. Water hits those and it runs right off into our streams, and it and it erodes stream banks because there's so much water flowing through so fast. This 60-acre farm, I wish I had done the math beforehand. I've done it before and it's just incredible. This 60-acre farm, when it rains 1 inch, keeps like a massive amount of water from running right off into the DuPage River. It holds it and then it seeps through slowly, the vast majority of it. And in Illinois, a huge environmental issue of ours is that we do have sometimes way too much rain. And the more we build impermeable surfaces, the more suburban sprawl envelops northern Illinois, the more this water issue and permeable and impermeable surfaces will matter more and more. Local farms, I think, tend to use less pesticides and fertilizers than huge conventional farms, in part because pesticides and fertilizers are very costly. Even organic farms use pesticides. Most organic farms still use some pesticides. We use a few and still use some fertilizers, some organically approved pesticides and fertilizers, but we don't use nearly as much, in part because they're much more expensive, in part because it doesn't really square with what we want to do, with what we believe is why we're farming. And in part because we have systems like cover cropping and feeding the soil that render those two less crucial of a tool. There's something we depend on less and less. But ultimately, the environmental impact of each farm is dependent on farm practices. I say largely dependent. I wouldn't say it's mostly dependent on farm practices. I think being a local farm makes you much less likely to have negative environmental impacts. And more importantly, you can always go to that farmer and just ask about the practices, which can feel scary at times, but trust me, like there's nothing farmers love more than talking about farming. And then I think really it should be said that the biggest environmental benefit of local food is probably just the connection to the place. And environmentalism really relies on people being connected to their place, because if you're not connected to the place that you're in, it's going to be harder and harder for you to fight for it. You're not going to know what it needs. You're not going to want to fight for it as hard. And yeah, so that connection to place, I think, is the biggest environmental impact or benefit. And then what I'm most passionate about is the economic and social impacts. We always hear about people moving out of Illinois, which is overblown, but could farms keep people here? I always think of this farm and other local farms in a vibrant local food economy as when you're doing habitat restoration and you kind of put like a netting in place on a stream bank to keep it from eroding so that plants can grow there and an ecological community can flourish there in time. And I think of local farms and a local farm and food economy as kind of the stream bank that can stabilize and keep people rooted here. Land that makes money, like farms that are run well, makes land valuable even when it's not developed. And so local agriculture can be a powerful tool against kind of this suburbanization that's really run rampant over the Chicago area for the past 50 or 60 years. And finally, I think it's worth comparing local economies and local social ecologies to kind of ecology in general. When we look at ecosystems in general, we're looking for a more diverse ecosystem. There are more, I always pronounce this word one of two ways, and I always think I'm wrong either way, but we're looking for more niches for in an ecosystem, plants and animals and fungi to fill, but in an economy that is highly diversified, people with all sorts of different skills and abilities can contribute at all, and different situations can contribute at all sorts of different levels and in different ways. And I think if you can diversify your local economy by having an agricultural component to it, I think that alone is of immense benefit. And so, yeah, I just think it's worth noting that local farms won't save the world on their own, but they do maybe make a world that's more worth saving. Because they are, yeah, that's the thing, is like, look, I just enjoy the products of local farms and seeing people live out their passion of being able to farm. Now onto the more kind of nuts and bolts off of the hippy dippy. A good question. A lot of times we get asked, what is in season now? And we have kind of our harvest plan. So of course, things don't always go according to plan at Green Earth or at any farm or anywhere in general. But you can kind of see we're in spring 3 right now at the top of the page. If you go down, it's the week of the 30th of May. And so we harvested arugula. We didn't quite get beets. The spots that are colored green are what we hope to get this week. We didn't get everything that we planned on. Some things are a little late because of how rainy and cold it was and because of some of our equipment issues this year. But this is A through O. And then this is P through T. So we grow, I don't even know, maybe 40 different crops of vegetables. And of those, some of them only have one variety name or variety that we use, but some of them, like the tomatoes, we have, probably 20 or 30 different varieties. So I would guess that we grow 100-ish varieties per year and probably a little over 40 crops, maybe 50 crops. You can see spring 1 of our CSA of our farm share starts on the 16th of May, and then we end fall week 4 right before Thanksgiving, which is a great way to end the season. And I have a link to a Google Doc that I'll send everyone, like once we're doing kind of Q&A, and I'll throw those pictures in there, I think, because I realize not really a ton of time to read through those. But where do you get this stuff? There are I came up with kind of 6 places where you can get local food, and I'm thinking primarily of vegetables, although there's also local fruit, local eggs, local meat, local herbs, local value-added products, and some things that fall even outside of those realms. Local grains, for instance. The first one that, of course, I'm going to mention or talk about is the CSA or farm share, where people will pay typically upfront at the beginning of the season, but most farms at this point have payment plans, or you can get it for like a month. Farms are kind of innovating in ways to make this more convenient for people. But a CSA is typically one producer. Some farms will buy things in, and then it's just worth mentioning, some places have co-opted that CSA term and are not just one producer. But usually they're pretty transparent about it. But if I was going to get a CSA, I would definitely get a CSA from a farm and not from, if an online service was selling a CSA, I would be a little more skeptical. And then on the right side, I kind of wrote who I thought this might be best for. I think CSAs are great for people who are all about veggies, people who really want to have that seasonal eating experience. I think they work well for families, typically work not as well for people who are single, or who don't eat a lot of vegetables. And then I think they're really great for people who want a committed, it's kind of funny to say this, but a committed relationship with one farm. Um, our CSAs are 20-week main season and then 2 4-week shoulder seasons. So people who are picking up every week, we see them every week for over half the year, which is great for us. Not everyone loves that though, and that's understandable. A farm stand is typically a store or a stand run by one farm, often on the farm, but Keller's is right down the street from us, and their farm is like 20 miles away, and their farm stand is right down the street. And depending on the farm, they may have products from other places. I think that's a little more common in a farm stand than in a farm share. Um, I think this is great for people who are casual shoppers, people who want to dabble in local food. For single people, people on a limited budget who maybe don't want to shell out up front for a CSA. And they're great for people who live near one. I live right down the street from Keller's. I'm going to go there this summer for sure. If I lived 10 miles away, I probably would not be making it to a farm stand. Co-ops are typically a store owned by members that at least seek to carry as many local products as reasonably possible. To my knowledge, there are only 2 open in the Chicago area right now, and a 3rd one opening in the next couple of years. There's the Dill Pickle on the north side of Chicago, the Sugar Beet in Oak Park, and then I want to say it's just Prairie Food Co-op, but maybe there's a second word to that, Prairie something Food Co-op. And I always forget if it's in Glen Ellen or Lombard, but they'll be opening in the next couple of years pretty soon. I'm really excited about that one. These are great for people who want a grocery store that also stocks local food, who live near one again. Also great for people who want to invest in their local community. If the local community and economy part of local food is what really draws you in, then a co-op might be a really good fit for you. You're going to get more involved than you would if you were getting it from the next one, from online delivery sites. And online delivery sites you order usually weekly for products. Some sites are more clear about their sourcing transparency, about what farms they get it from. I personally, in the winter, get a lot of stuff from Irvin Shelley's Fresh Picks, and places like this are great for working parents, for busy folks, people willing to eat from kind of larger farms who do some of this wholesale distribution. Oh my, wow, that time went by so fast. I really need to whip through this. But yeah, this is great for people who are really busy and for people who just want something delivered on their doorstep, who want to save some time. Farmers markets, I don't think I really need to tell you what they are. I think we all have been to them. I think we all know what farmers markets are. And farmers markets are a great kind of weekday evening or weekend experience. And they're, a lot of people do get their groceries from farmers markets. I personally have always enjoyed working farmers markets more than actually going to them. They're not for everyone, and that's okay. And then the last option is growing your own in a garden, container gardening, community gardens. And this is for everyone. It's for experienced gardeners or people who want to play a little bit. And real quick, just how to find these. Google local farm near me. Of course, I was at work when I did this, so Green Earth Harvest was the first one that came up for me. But local farm stand near me, local CSA near me, so on, and local food co-op near me, so on and so forth. And then I wanted to talk And then I wanted to talk real quick or share, and I will go through this a little faster probably, but sorry, give me 1 second. You know, farmers are not known for our phenomenal technology skill. That is, there we go. And so I just want to talk real quick about growing your own in your yard or even on your countertop. You can grow microgreens, you can grow kitchen herbs, you can try a mushroom kit. I have tried a mushroom kit and I did really bad at it. I don't know, I was not in a space in my life where I was going to be misting it most days, but they're pretty easy actually. You'd be surprised at what you're able to do. If you're not sure, like buy a kit for your first time. They have microgreens kits, they have herbs are fairly easy. Mushroom kits are fairly easy. And the nice thing about this isn't necessarily you're not going to be pumping out volume, a heavy volume of produce, but it becomes something for you to connect to, something to observe, and it becomes really a hobby more than just a way to eat. And especially for herbs, like homegrown herbs beat the heck out of anything at the grocery store by a lot. And if you don't want to grow plants, if you really love animals though, you can get hens. And in probably most suburbs now, and I'm pretty sure in the city of Chicago too, you can have hens of a certain number, and I'm sure there are fairly basic ordinances in most places, but become the most popular neighbor and have fresh eggs for people. One thing I have heard from friends who have hens is that like you will be the most popular person among the neighborhood kids. Like they will want to come over and spend time with the chickens for sure. So be ready for that. But and another option is to eat the weeds. There are tons of tasty, nutritious, forageable weeds in your garden, around your house. There's Connie listed a few here: purslane, dandelion, lamb's quarters, nettles. We have actually a crew member at the farm this year who has started foraging for thistle, which is, we have another crew member who just kind of laughed at it at first, but it's actually like pretty decent. Dandelion, for instance, dandelion weeds or dandelion leaves are grown as a vegetable. In other places, they're related to lettuce and to radicchio in the same family. I believe the picture on the left is purslane. And I think in Spanish, they're called verdulagas. And they make a really good salad. And then if you haven't started a garden yet, is it too late? No, not at all. You still have probably a month. And you could get like tomatoes and some of the hotter stuff in. Some of the hot season and long season crops. And then you have a little bit of time after that when you could do cucumbers or zucchini when you can do cucumbers and zucchini, things that will probably take about a month to begin producing after you plant them. But then you can also try cool season crops. We are planting into our fields as late and seeding into our fields as late as early September, actually. So for things like carrots, spinach, I have this on my other slideshow, but I'm not going to go over right now. But for things like carrots, spinach, storage radishes, like watermelon radishes, or some storage turnips, daikon radishes, we're typically seeding those in like the middle of July and that's plenty of time here. For things like kale and broccoli, if you want to plant plants that you either buy or start from seed or whatever, you can plant those through, probably the latest you'd want to do it is kind of the middle of July. But some of those kale you can harvest typically right through sometime in November, or until it gets too cold for you to want to go out into your garden. And this is a great list of some things that are kind of cool season crops that are great in the fall. Kohlrabi is a good one. Planting garlic in the fall for the next year. Any perennial herb, chives, oregano, sorrel is a really fun one. And then a lot of the quick crops like radishes, I'm trying to think, outside you could probably, radishes, beets, or radishes, some salad turnips, baby greens like arugula or baby kale. A lot of those are ready so fast, so you can seed those in kind of early September even. Their growth will slow down. Your fall garden's growth will slow down as we get less and less sunlight going into August and September and then October. So you kind of have to keep that in mind, but I have a really good calculator for that I'll send out in the chat as well. And then leafy greens are really great in the cool season. They're much better in September and October than they are in July and August. So lettuce, spinach, chard, I mentioned kale before. Yeah, I would encourage anyone to grow your own. Absolutely. Before I started farming, my parents had a garden, and at a certain point I wanted to start helping them, but I was kind of a little afraid, like, oh, what if I kill a plant? Like, I just don't even know where to start really. What if I could like kill a plant? And then I started farming, and I kind of realized like I'm going to kill thousands of plants a year, and so I should just kind of get over that. Be okay with not knowing what you're doing at first, and that's kind of the fun of it, I think. I'm going to switch back real quick. Boo, 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 boo. And talk a little bit about winter. You have to eat in the winter, and so do farmers. So yeah, I do go to grocery stores throughout the year, but also more in the winter for sure. At Green Earth Harvest, we're planning to grow more into the winter, and you can do this a little bit at home by various methods of season extension. I won't really get into that here, but happy to answer questions if anyone has them. Or growing storage vegetables like potatoes, butternut squash, radishes, and turnips store really well in your cooler, or in your refrigerator in our cooler here on the farm. If you're feeling really adventurous, sweet potatoes, onions, garlic, things like that. And then I mentioned a little bit about your fall gardens. Yeah, May is not the only time to plant. I've heard July referred to as, and I refer to it often as a second spring, and that on the farm we're planting out everything that we'll be eating in September, October, November, and beyond. It's a really exciting time of the year. So now's the time to start thinking about getting in on that. And then we'll do questions for sure, Q&A, but if something comes up to you later on, this is my email, jhalm@theconservationfoundation.org. Always feel free to shoot me an email. It might take, especially in the summer, a little longer than I'd like to get back to you. You can ask Connie about that one, but I will definitely get back to you for sure, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And yeah, that's all I've got for you, but I'm here to take questions.
Thank you so much, Jason. That's fantastic. You had me cracking up a few times. I was over here laughing and taking notes. First of all, thanks for the flashback with those wedge salads and the Popeye and the canned spinach. When you said it tasted awful, I was like, oh my gosh, I remember thinking the same thing and wanting to try it when I was a kid. And I thought, oh man, I think Popeye is tough just for the fact that he was able to choke the stuff down. Fresh tastes so much better to me. And then, another thing too that I really thought was helpful, there was a lot of good information. You covered so many good things, so many good topics. A couple things that really stood out to me. I really think it's very helpful to see that portion about what is in season when, because a lot of people don't know, especially if they have no background growing. If they just go to the grocery store and they see everything at the grocery store, they don't necessarily know where any of that comes from, or how it was grown, or where, or what type of climate. And when I was doing the farmers market, I remember somebody coming over and asking how much my pineapples were. I said, I don't have any pineapples. I don't grow pineapples, because they were comparing prices. And they said, well, but they have them over there at that stand in the corner. Well, sure, because that was a wholesaler who picked them up, and they didn't grow those. And so they, there's education there. A lot of people don't know. And so that's really good information to have, to know what is grown here locally and what is available when, at what different times during the season.
Yeah, and that's oh, got some feedback there. And what's interesting too about our, like I said, I'll throw that in this Google Doc that I'll send out. But what we have in season might not be exactly the same as what another farm has in season. Although there are probably some similarities, because it also depends on what the grower feels like growing, what they think works well on their farm at that time, in terms of the setup. But yeah, if you see like a farm saying that they have local pineapples, that's just not quite right.
They're local to somewhere, just not here.
There
unless
are
we're really expanding our view on that spectrum of what we consider local.
The really interesting, a really interesting case is Mighty Vine in Rochelle, Illinois. They have I think a 17-acre greenhouse, and they grow tomatoes inside year round. And that really does stretch the definition of like, what do you consider local food? But I eat their tomatoes in the winter because they're definitely better than Florida tomatoes shipped in over a week,
Yeah, exactly. And I also like the point you brought up about, with the land and water use, and there's the valid point there too, in terms of, when we can do that and source the food more locally, we're taking some pressure off of those farms in the other states where they're maybe dealing with drought and, all issues of their own. We're taking some pressure off of those systems by picking up some of the slack and providing, some of that, taking responsibility here to grow some of our own. So yeah, that's helpful as well. Not only the availability to be able to have tomatoes in the winter, that's great, but also to, have to not have to rely on others to do all of that for us all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I also was cracking up when you mentioned killing thousands of plants. I love that. I think and there's a joke or a meme or something about that too, that says, everybody thinks I'm a really great grower, but really my secret is just that I plant so much, you can't tell how much has died. So it looks very abundant, but that's just because I planted so much. That's funny. So I don't see any questions in the Q&A, and so I'm going to double check in the chat because sometimes we get them there too. If anybody has them, go ahead and pop them in. And otherwise, we've got just a few minutes left. So
I do see one. How do you feel about raised beds versus growing on the ground?
Yeah.
I don't think it really matters too much, to be honest. I think probably raised beds, if you fill them with kind of a loose soil, you might get better results. But I definitely don't think, generally speaking, I don't think raised beds are necessary. But if you're growing just right in the ground, you definitely want to break up the compaction. And so you want to kill whatever's on top if it's like grass. And then you want to, typically what people use is like a broad fork or a digging fork or a spade shovel to kind of get in and break open the soil just to allow, aerate it, allow water to infiltrate and nutrients to infiltrate. So raised beds sometimes are easier for people who are kind of pure beginners, but I growing in the ground is, I think, perfectly good for most people. The one exception to that is if you think you might live in a place that might have contaminated soil, like if there was like heavy industry where you live, you might want to check into that, and might be more likely to want to do raised bed, but otherwise I wouldn't stress about it one way or the other necessarily.
I agree. I feel like raised beds have become very, very trendy, which is, there's nothing wrong with that, except that it has led some people to think that's what you have to do. And I don't think that's the case at all, unless, like you said, if there are certain indications, if you need something raised up for accessibility to make it easier for you to access, or if you have back issues or whatever it is, great, then, do a raised bed that's even taller. And if you have, a potential that there's contaminated soil, the key point there is that if there's a potential for contamination, you want not just the raised bed, but a barrier between the soil in that raised bed, which now has to be deep enough to accommodate all of those root systems, but we need that barrier to block the roots from accessing that contaminated soil. And that can be really, really helpful also in urban settings, even to be able to turn like a parking lot into a garden, to be able to put down the liner and put raised beds right up on top of, blacktop. So there are definitely certain times when they're called for or when they're really beneficial. But a lot of times it's just kind of preference, and some people just like them for the aesthetics and how they look. But really, ideally, in my opinion, I would like my plants to access that soil food web and all the microorganisms and everything that's happening, all that soil life. So I kind of don't want that barrier unless there's a reason where you have to keep the roots out of that, like in a contamination kind of a thing. But yeah, they're very trendy. So I think that's a great question.
And it's funny that they've trended for certainly aesthetic reasons, because I've made a couple from scratch and they are ugly. Like most people could probably make one better than I have. But and then another reason you might want it is if you have a lot of flooding in that area, you might want to raise it up a little bit. But
absolutely, flooding, and another thing too is just a head start. So sometimes, like when I first moved into my home where I live now, the area I wanted to grow in was just kind of backfilled topsoil, not really the best. So I'm adding compost, and over time I'm growing and building that soil, and really, over time, now I've got great soil. I have hardly any weeds that come up there, but at the beginning, it wasn't quite that plug and play, quick and ready and easy to go. Whereas if you want a head start and you want to, bring in soil or build up on top, and then especially if you don't have that barrier between the raised bed and the soil, the native soil underneath, over time, all of that is going to be mixing in and improving the soil underneath as well. So it's a good way sometimes to get a head start when you want to jump in and garden right away without having to wait and do all of the work of trying to maybe correct heavy clay or something else like that that could be challenging when you're trying to just get in and start growing. Yeah, great question. All right. Any others? I think we'll do a last call. I think it was a very informative talk. So I even had a couple of questions at the beginning and you answered them. So
yes.
Yeah, so that was great. So I love it. Like you said, nothing farmers love more than talking about farming. So I think you covered a lot of it. So, so I'm not surprised that we don't have a ton of questions pouring in. I think you answered a lot of them. Last call, we'll give it one last chance if anybody wants to pop one in, and then I think we will we'll go ahead and log off for the evening. But yeah, we've got a big thank you too in the chat. Thank you for that. Loved this presentation and learned a lot. We appreciate that. Thank you for the feedback. Yeah, Jason is very helpful and knowledgeable.
Thank you. And let me drop this Google Doc real quick.
Yeah, that'd be great.
There you go.
Perfect.
That should work.
Yep, I'll leave it up there for a minute too, in case anybody wants to click on it and save the link. And the other thing too is I'm going to go ahead and save that also, and then I can include that when I post this later.
Awesome.
Save it right now. For some reason it didn't just let me copy it. I'm going to try that one more time. Oops, there we go. Now I've got it. Okay, now I can share it later. All right, fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. Actually, let me see. Oh, you know what? No, we do have another question. How did you become interested in farming? Which is another great question. I love that.
Yeah, that is a great question. I actually, it's kind of interesting. I graduated from college in 2014 with a degree in environmental studies from Lake Forest College, a super small liberal arts college in the north suburbs of, on the North Shore near suburbs of Chicago. And I actually worked on a guest ranch in Colorado for not quite a year, maybe 10 months or so. Came back that January after I graduated, and it's kind of like, oh, I really don't know what I want to do, but I want to work outside. And I found a job at Green Earth. And it was like the closest outdoor job that I didn't have a car at the time I could ride my bike to. So I was riding my bike to work the first couple of years before I saved up and bought a car. And so it was really just by chance. And it's just funny how those things turn out sometimes.
I like that. What's that about luck, like the good luck to fall into what you're enjoying to do is actually, luck there is the combination of preparation and opportunity. So you had, those things came together, and it just, I'm glad that worked out.
Yeah, me too.
We're glad to have you. I'm glad to work with you. Great question. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jason. I appreciate it. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be posting the recording. So that will be on YouTube. We'll try to get it posted within 24 hours. And because I know people who registered so that they could get the link will want to watch it as soon as that's available, since they weren't able to join us live. So thank you to those who were able to join us live this evening. We appreciate it. And we hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for watching, guys.